hello, and thank you all once again for tuning in to another episode of Outside the Box. And for those of you who have been following me for some time, you know that I sometimes do special segments called Let's Talk About Relationships because I am not only a life coach, but I'm also a relationship coach. And this is my specialty. This is my wheelhouse. I really, really like to discuss things about relationships. Relationships have been the platform that God has taught me a lot of the lessons that I've learned in life. And so I really like to dig in there and discuss relationships because outside of our own personal issues with ourselves, relationships is the second most important thing that we have in our lives, whether it's romantic, with our children, with our spouses, friends, co-workers. Relationships are really important. And it's important that we learn how to navigate those because God did create relationships for a purpose. But for today, I have a special guest that is going to be discussing this topic with me. We're going to be talking about how to divorce-proof your marriage. But before we go into that, I just want to remind you all to please like, share, and follow me on social media. You can find me on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And I also have a website at www.unveilingthespirit.com where you can find out more about my coaching services, my books, if I have any webinars coming up, and also find out more of the past shows and topics that I've done. So, also, you can you can watch my shows on Roku on an app called the Entertainment Theater. You can find shows, current shows, and even past shows daily that I have done on there. Again, you go on the Roku to download the Entertainment Theater app, and not only get some of my podcast shows, but other independent creators' podcast shows. And so it's really important that we kind of support those people who are really trying to come up and do it, and we don't have the big financial backing that some of these bigger places have, because we all have something important to say. And so make sure you please go there and follow to support independent creators as well. Okay, so let's dive right into this conversation, which I'm very excited about. The guest that I have today is Tim. Can you say your last name? Because I'm really, really bad with pronouncing names. So
it's Kellis, Tim Kellis.
Tim Kellis. Tim Kellis is a relationship coach and also an author, and he has written a book, but his book is more connected with his coaching program about some of the big problems that we have in relationships. And so, but before we get into that, Tim, can you please go ahead and introduce yourself and let everybody know what you do?
Absolutely. Well, what I do is I teach couples how to create lifelong marriages. That's in essence what I do. And my mission is to lower the divorce rate. But let me give you my background, because I'm not a psychologist, and that turns out to be important. And I know you're the same way, Sage. I actually was raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and my dad was a cab driver, so I was raised poor. When I was 12 years old, I told my mom I wanted to be a Catholic priest when I was 12 years old, and then I discovered girls. So that whole career path kind of got derailed, but I happened to do well in school. So I have an engineering degree. I spent 9 years in the telecom equipment industry. I went back and got my MBA, and I landed on Wall Street as the first semiconductor analyst on Wall Street to focus on the communications market.
Wow.
So I have a very significant background, and I have a very analytical background. In fact, I call myself analytical. And at the height of this, in 2000, it was actually a girl I had known for about 8 years. She always had a boyfriend. I always had a girlfriend. We were in the same group of friends in Dallas. I lived in Dallas for like 10 years. But we met and got together when we weren't dating anybody else, and we fell in love. And when I work with people, one of my favorite questions I ask them is, at the very beginning of your relationship with your spouse, wasn't it easy? And it's amazing how fun these stories are of two people coming together, meeting, and both independent of each other, deciding they want to spend the rest of their lives together. It's a fascinating part of what I do. I love taking couples back to the very beginning. And the same thing happened with this girl and I. So quickly in love, going to spend the rest of our lives together. But then we started fighting. But more importantly, when we went to the therapist and the therapist wasn't helping, is when I decided that I needed to take the subject on. In fact, in the psychology world, it's called a double bind. A double bind is when you look right and you run into a wall, and you look left, you run into a wall. That was where I was, and it's where people get really insane in a literal sense. And my only outlet, I'm an analyst. I analyze industries for a living. I was going to take on this project. I spent nearly 2 years researching and writing my book.
Wow.
100 books went in the research of my book. And we can go in this in much detail because I liked our conversation before we got started, but 20% of my book is a summary of Carl Jung's autobiography.
Okay, wow.
And you know who Carl Jung is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just so for the audience who doesn't know who he is, because my mission is to finally replace Freud with Jung, Jung was 19 years younger than Freud. Freud looked up to Jung so much that he considered him not only his heir apparent, his replacement, but also his son. They had a father-son relationship. That's how close they were. Okay. And as we all know, Freud's theory is that sex is what motivates us. It's not true, but it's what the entire psychology industry has followed. 200,000 licensed therapists all believe that sex is what motivates us, and it's not true, and Jung disagreed with him. And they had their famous breakup in 1912, and Jung was the one that figured this out. Freud did.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Jung
I didn't know that. I did not know that. I know who Carl Jung is, but I didn't know what you just said. That's really interesting. And so what was it that he figured out?
He figured out there are root causes to our mental problems. He figured out that our mental problems are mental. Understand that the psychology industry today believes that our mental problems are medical diseases, which is not true. And it's the conventional science, listen to this one, Sage. Conventional science has long held the belief that the mind is an illusion, a side effect of the electrochemical activities of the brain. Whenever you hear a professional discuss the brain, serotonin, dopamine, neuron synapse, bipolar, chemical imbalance, whenever you hear a professional any labeling, that is the biology theory. Let me elaborate on that. Okay. Even though Jung and Freud had their famous breakup in 1912, when Freud died in 1939, Jung still praised him. He still looked up to him. And what Jung said about Freud was that Freud's work was epic making, what he called it. And he said what Freud did was Freud introduced psychology into psychiatry. Okay. Keep in mind, psychiatry used to be to stick the ice pick up the eye socket, do a frontal lobotomy because the frontal cortex is where we think.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
They had never tried to enter into up here before. That's what Freud and Jung, as it turns out, started in the early 20th century. But what Freud did was Freud introduced biology into psychology. He did not there's no psychology in psychology today. Psychology is not a mental, that's why they give behavioral advice. This is the reason why the psychology industry gives behavioral advice, because they're treating us like pets, like animals. Right. Because that's why the biggest question in therapy today is how does it make you feel, not how does it make you think, because you're not capable of thinking because you're an animal. So they want you to discuss your feelings in some really vague, ambiguous, really non-productive belief that it will somehow overcome your mental problems. It doesn't. Right. But that's the foundation of the industry. This is why 80% of couples who seek help from professional licensed therapists end up getting divorced. It's unbelievable when you realize nobody has ever analyzed the efficacy of the psychology industry before. That's what I've done.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So can you, because I know for some people watching, they might be a little bit confused by what you're saying. I'm really big on breaking stuff down. I think you might be that way too, because I'm analytical just like you are. So can you give like a quick practical example of why that doesn't work? So if we're just addressing the behavior and not the thinking, can you give a quick example of what that looks like?
Absolutely. The 5 love languages. If Gary Chapman wanted to write a book that was actually helpful, because the 5 love languages doesn't work, but if he wanted to write a book that was actually helpful, he would have written a book that stated that both in the marriage should do all five. Because remember, all five are common sense things that we all should be doing in our marriage. And the one that you picked out either because you didn't have it in your childhood or your spouse didn't have it in his or her childhood, so they're not giving it to you. Then it becomes a psychological conversation. Remember, there's no psychology in psychology. There's no discussion of our child. They just so you know, they just recently did discover what they call ACE, adverse childhood experiences. They've not yet figured out forgiveness. In fact, a couple who are friends of mine went to a Gary Chapman seminar recently where he actually talked about forgiveness. First time I've heard a professional licensed therapist talk about forgiveness, but he's wrong.
Wow. So what was he wrong about when he talked about forgiveness?
Great question. Okay. And this is how bizarre this conversation gets. Okay. So I have a mentor of mine. His name is Dr. Michael Rice. His last name is spelled Ryce. In fact, he and I are collaborating in my group that you and I talked about earlier. But he is translating the oldest Bible in existence that was written in Aramaic. Jesus spoke Aramaic. He didn't speak English.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things you realize about the history of the Bible is I call them dilutions, but they're translations from Aramaic, the New Testament, from Aramaic to Greek to Latin to the modern languages. That's the steps that it took. Where now it's in our native tongue. Yeah. And what Dr. Rice discovered is when the Greeks translated forgiveness from Aramaic, they translated it to mean to pardon. And this has cost our civilization for 2,000 years, this mistake. Because what that means is that when I perceive that you did something wrong to me, Sage, you did something in my perception as I'm upset. For me to forgive you under the Greek pardon concept, that means I let you off the hook. The problem with that is I still have the anxiety that was created by my perspective of what you've done. What Jesus literally said, what it literally gets translated directly from Aramaic to English is that forgiveness means to cancel.
Okay.
So when you forgive somebody, you cancel the anxieties that existed from that experience. The only reason, let me give you my backdrop on this from my perspective. The only reason why I could say I have solved the marriage problem is because I forgave my parents when I was 25 years old.
You are speaking my language. Oh my goodness. Yes.
In fact, this is what I teach people. If you are watching this and you are looking for help, the very first question that you need to ask is, when are we getting to the forgiveness of my parents part? If you go see a professional therapist and he says, well, we'll get into that down the road, you say, well, I'll come back at that point. You waste anybody else's time. But when you realize you want to get me to forgiving my parents, then I will come and meet with you. Because that is the difference between a good therapist and one that doesn't know what they're doing. If they help you forgive your childhood, they know what they're doing. The bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah in the Jewish tradition, the first communion in the Christian tradition. I'm in South Florida, the quinceañero, and I always screw that one up, in the Latino tradition. These are rituals that are initiation ceremonies into adulthood. One of the most significant passages of the Bible from a marriage perspective is the passage that says a child should cleave from their parents so that they can become a spouse to their spouse. If you do not cleave from your parents, you are still a child.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Regardless of your physical age. Okay.
Yeah.
That turns out to be the very first step in the mental development into adulthood, into maturity.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Young is the one that figured that out.
Wow.
Okay.
So let me
real
can
quick.
I stop you? Okay, go ahead.
Young cured schizophrenia. If you want to know how weird this is, Young healed schizophrenia. That is not a biological disease. It's a mental issue, which is mentally based, by figuring out the root causes of the mental problem of people he worked with.
Yes. Wow. I love everything you're saying. I did a show last year around the time I first started this about how childhood trauma affects your adult relationships.
Of
And
course.
yeah, and I really even in my own coaching in my books, that is the main thing. And I think Jesus really addresses a lot. I mean, even if you think about the fact that God sent Jesus, because people say in the Old Testament, like, well, why did God give people all these rules and things like that? That was basically just the surface issue. Sending Jesus solved the root issue. And so I believe that God is very, very big on getting to the root. Let's get to the root of the problem, because everything else is just a waste of time. We're just spinning our wheels unless we get to the root of the problem. And so go ahead, go ahead.
Let me elaborate on that. That's a very cool thing. Let me really blow your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to this guy's website, his last name is spelled R-Y-C-E. His book is called Why Is This Happening to Me Again? I think his website is whyagain.org. He has translated the Beatitudes.
Okay.
Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, for example.
Mm.
That is not what Jesus said.
Mm.
Jesus was a brilliant philosopher for modern times. For modern times.
Yeah.
If Jesus was alive today, you read his actual words that this guy deciphers, it blows your mind. What Jesus literally said in the Beatitudes, and you can find them on his website, he is a brilliant philosopher for our times. I could not imagine uneducated, ignorant people that lived 2,000 years ago trying to listen to this guy, and they're like, what the hell are you talking about?
Exactly.
I have no clue to what you're saying, but he talks about things in physics form. Dr. Rice is brilliant at his translation of what Jesus literally was teaching people. They had no clue what he was talking about.
Yeah, they did.
Way over their head.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of those things in the Bible, very small nuggets of knowledge. I mean, they are so relevant. I mean, you have seen them evolve over time. That is right. Like the Bible says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. What does that mean? That means that you got to get down to the psychological issue that's going on. Guard your heart, because out of it flows the issues of life. I mean, it's the same stuff. So I'm totally like on board with what you're talking about. And I really like that you pointed out about forgiving your parents, because everybody has imperfect parents. Like, even when they do their best, they still make mistakes. And those issues will follow you. And the only way to solve them is to forgive them. Because if you try to go back to your childhood and make them do it differently, like, it's not possible. So in order to move forward from that, you have to forgive them. It is so important, because nobody's parents are perfect. So yeah.
And let me elaborate on that. What I am about to explain to you is the number one thing to learn for a successful marriage. This changes marriages forever. This one concept will completely revolutionize how people approach marriages. Okay? So my parents were strict with me, with all four of us. Okay? My dad is no longer around. He knows I love and respect him. My mom still is. If you were to call my mom on the phone right now, and you would ask her about raising her four, she would tell you she was strict with us. Every time I talk to my mom, she says the exact same things. I was very hard on you, kid. Okay? I go to my 20-year high school reunion. I'm talking to one of my classmates, and I made a comment about my childhood. And he looks at me and goes, oh, about my parents. He looks at me and goes, oh, that's right, you had the strict parents. That comment shocked me to my core. Because what I did was I went back to my high school days, and I realized that when I was in high school, I never once, ever once thought about anybody but myself. When I was in high school, the only person who mattered was me, as it's supposed to be, by the way.
Yeah.
I have a 17-year-old son. And I understand that he's at that state where it's part of the ego. Ego is I. All ego means, ego is Latin for I. All it means is I, me.
Yeah,
me.
yeah. I'm the focus. Yeah.
But ego is a definition that we tell ourselves about what that means. And unfortunately, one of the things we haven't figured out is a balanced ego is not when you're better than anybody else. It's when you're better than you used to be. That is the billion-dollar question that's been answered about what you're supposed to figure out about who you are, what that means. You define you. Nobody else defines you. Okay, so I go to this 20-year reunion. I realized when I was in high school, I never thought about anybody else. When I forgave my parents, the trigger event, and I won't elaborate unless you want me to, but the trigger event was when I, for the first time in my entire life, looked at it from their perspective.
Oh, wow. Amazing, amazing. Yeah.
If you want to have a successful marriage, understand your partner's perspective. That is the biggest thing that I teach people. If you are able to see something, let me give my example of this. So, Sage, do you get mad at slow drivers?
I try not to. So.
Back when I was working on Wall Street, I used to be rich. I had a sports car, very fast sports car, by the way. So it was one of my things that I was upset with myself, is I used to get mad at slow drivers all the time until I had an epiphany. And that epiphany was when I, for the first time, sat in their seat. Comes from To Kill a Mockingbird. If you read that as a child, if you want to understand a man, you have to walk in his shoes. That line changed my life. I remember reading that as a kid thinking, that is profound. That's one of the biggest things I've learned personally about life. And you know that if you're a mature person as well, Sage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's a big indication of maturity. And again, immaturity is not a negative. It's a process. It's something that we are all supposed to go through. There's this negative connotation in maturity, but the negative connotation is because of lack of education. Because quite honestly, nobody's teaching us this. This is what you and I are doing. This is the mission that people like you and I are on, because we realize the professionals are not addressing this. Somebody has to. Because this ridiculous 50% divorce rate, the destruction of families, unbelievable. And we get 5 love languages. And just so you know, to finish the Gary Chapman story, his forgiveness post, what he says is that the anxiety doesn't go away. You don't forget. Okay. Yeah. Or the anxiety doesn't go away. That's not true. What he's basically saying, the industry is trying to tell us that we have mental problems. There's nothing we could do about it. So we have to see a therapist once a week so we can discuss how we feel about the fact that we can do nothing about our mental problems. That is quite honestly the foundation of the industry, because it's more profitable. Solving mental problems. This is what Jung realized. Jung was able to heal people in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions. Not years, not months, a matter of a couple of weeks. Jung was able to figure out the problem. I'm really good. I can figure out the problem. Within 4 weeks working with couples, by at least that time, I figured out what the problem is, and I solved that problem.
Yeah. And I like even what you said about the 5 love languages, and I never even thought about it the way you're saying it. But what you experience as love comes from something, like, so, and sometimes those things are not functional. Exactly. Sometimes they are dysfunctional things, and so you need somebody to, for example, shower you with gifts, because maybe you grew up poor and you think if they don't shower you with gifts, they don't love you, when you actually have an issue that you bring it from childhood. So I totally like, wow, I really like that. Yeah. So now let's go into, because I know you said 2 of the main things that you focus on is communication and conflict resolution. So, and I'm assuming that when you're saying to understand your partner's perspective, that's under the communication umbrella. So what other tips do you use as far as communication that you think is lacking in a lot of marriages today, which is why we have such a high divorce rate? Even Christian marriages, let me add, because people think that, as a Christian, and I think a lot of Christians have this idea that they're going to do it better, or they can do it better, and they're very shocked when they get married and they start having problems, like, especially if you pray for a spouse. It's like, oh, I pray for this spouse, God is going to bring me this perfect man, this perfect lady. No, nobody's perfect. And then when they start having problems, it's like, oh my goodness, what is this? And so we don't really understand the stuff underneath the surface that actually makes a marriage work. And we need to understand these things, just like you said. And God wants us to seek these things out because we need to know them. Like, he's not going to force them down our throats. So anyway, what's another factor in communication that you think is an issue?
So let me start off with an example. Okay. So just for the sake of this conversation, Sage, let's say you and I are married and we have young kids. Okay. And it's time for us to, and we're gonna send them to school. We're gonna pay for them to go to school. Okay, we're gonna send our kids to school. Okay. Think about my number one concern, because I'm a guy, is cost. Okay, and again, let me, before I say what I'm about to say, let me start something off. In 1970, less than 1% of all law and medical degrees went to women. By 1990, that number was over half. Do not anybody watch this and say anything that I'm saying negative about women thinking. Women can think. Women are logical. Women are educated. Women can think. I get criticized about this all the time with what I'm about to say. You are missing the point. Women are educated. I am not insulting women with what I'm about to say. Okay. So back to our analogy. Where are the kids going to school? Okay. Wouldn't your number one concern be the environment of the school? I'm asking you. You're my wife. Okay. I'm going to ask you, where you and I are discussing, where are the kids going to school? Your biggest issue is going to be, is the school comfortable?
Yeah.
Emotional. My perspective is logical.
Yeah.
That is our background. Before the education of women, the structure of the marriage was patriarchy, as the church teaches us. When are we having our first female pope? Oh no, I didn't. Did I say that out loud? Oh my God! You criticize the church. You're not allowed to do that. I did not say that. Delete that when we're recording. But anyhow, the church teaches us that I'm in charge, and I'm also responsible for thinking. You're subordinate, and you're responsible for emotions. Those were defined, distinct. Man, logic, woman, emotional. There's no barrier between the two. Men did not develop an emotional bond towards their children. That is one of the new things in this notion that I discussed called common sense, which is when the consensus comes together and actually solves problems because our leaders fail us, which is like what we're doing with gun control right now. But common sense is when the masses get together and say, those guys upstairs and girls upstairs aren't doing their job, so we've got to do it. It's called common sense. Okay. Yeah. And so one of the things in common sense that's changing is I'm very emotionally connected with my son. But the point is historically speaking, man was logical, woman was emotional. When I say the solution is equality, that means both get to do both. One of the biggest holes in our culture of marriage today is emotional men. Okay. So this notion of we're going to talk about environment or cost. Those are, one is a logical, one the other is emotional. They are equally important.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is the most important point. I'm not saying emotions are subordinate to logic. That's not what I'm saying. Emotions are as equally important as logic. In fact, it was one of the things that I discovered is in this whole process is I am embracing my emotional side. I'm not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with it, as Jerry Seinfeld so famously said, because I'm developing an emotional perspective too. If you do not understand it, the logical side and the emotional side of whatever is going on in a conflict, the cost is not the only discussion in where the kids are going to school. Okay, you have to understand the logical side and the emotional side of equal importance in order for us to be able to come with a solution of where you and I are going to send our kids to school. That is the other part of communication that's important for people to understand. In fact, let me elaborate. Okay. Carl Jung is beautiful. You guys, it will blow anybody's mind if they spend the time to understand Carl Jung. And let me give you one concept that he talks about: the anima and the animus. The anima is an unconscious developing vision in a man of a woman. The animus is an unconscious developing vision in a woman of a man.
Okay.
So when you date, you're finding out what you don't like. That's why you break up. They are called stepping stones. Well, I don't like this. So next time I meet a girl, I'm going to make sure she doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, okay?
Yeah.
Not only that, you meet a girl, her looks, or you meet a guy, his looks, that's creating a mental image of what you're looking for. Oh, I liked her blue eyes. Well, I'm going to look, whatever. And again, I'm giving you logic when the reality is love is an emotional connection. I can't If I was in love with you, Sage, it wouldn't be because your eyes are this, your nose, your mouth. It would be because you, as a person, is somebody who I've been looking for, which is the point. Mm-hmm. You develop a vision until the person you meet matches that vision. Okay, when I meet the woman who matches my anima, she becomes the woman I'm interested in. And when she meets a man who matches her animus, and that person is me, then she meets the person she's been looking for. And what makes that concept so important is you are looking for your partner before you met. And people just take for granted their spouse, they can leave them. There's no replacement section at Walmart. You cannot drive down to the local, I'm done, Sage, I'm through with you. I'm going to go find a replacement wife down at the local Walmart. We're done. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But Carl Jung says that the anima and the animus manifest themselves most typically in personified form in the irrationality of a man's feeling and a woman's thinking. What he's saying with that phrase is when you and I quit getting along in our marriage, I shut my emotional side down and you shut your logical side down as a woman, because that is what we are least comfortable doing. We go back to the corner we're most comfortable with. So I lose an emotional connection with you, which is empathy, and you lose a logical connection with me, which is respect. This is one of the reasons why you hear women talk about respect all the time. Because women are the ones that lose respect for their husbands, and husbands lose empathy for their wives.
Yeah, wow.
When communication breaks down. Another big, huge concept that I teach couples when I work with them.
And then I would even go is to say that, again, this is in the Bible. The Bible says, husbands, love your wives, and tells the woman to respect her husband. But mind you, this was thousands of years ago. So this statement, this very, like, I guess you can say maybe passing statement that was made, we're seeing, and I get why you're saying that Jesus was not necessarily talking to the people of that time. He was talking to us in the future through that book, because we're just now starting to understand the ramifications and the depth of that. So there's no way they could fully understand that at the time, because we're just getting it, and this is thousands of years later.
Well, again, and we don't need to elaborate on history, but just one point to make. You're a woman 2,000 years ago. You were worse than dirt. I don't know. What were women? How were women? Saudi Arabia, they could still kill wives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
King Henry VIII beheaded 2 of his wives.
Yeah. Oh,
so if we're breaking up, Sage, that's what we're doing. We're going to the guillotine, and I get to pull the switch.
Look,
it's called development. It's called development, because the thing that's changed is it's so important to understand that in the 1960s, for the first time in the history of human civilization, women are educated. Women were never educated other than how to be a mother and a wife. They were never educated. Women, for the first time in thousands of years since Adam and Eve, to be honest with you, because that's when men took over, have finally gotten educated. And now that's why equality is the solution that we're looking for today versus the old one, which is I'm in charge. Women are now capable of contributing to the marriage, in essence. And the solution is for both of us to have an equal say in the marriage. Where there, listen to this one, and I'll hand it back over. Where there are no distinctions, there can be no superiority. Perfect equality affords no temptation for abuse or control. When couples learn that, when I work with them, I can almost audibly hear a clicking in their heads when they realize, oh, if I give up control and my partner gives up control, we're not going to abuse each other. It's the letting go of control, which is what people need to learn in their marriage in order for it to be successful. Once they let go of control and they come together, what they learn is they learn to take on the world instead of each other. Exactly. Let me repeat that. When you learn to take on the world instead of each other, your marriage is going to last forever.
Exactly. Wow. And so one thing that brought to my mind when you were talking about the woman's emotional side and the man's logical side, I think too often we try to, and I think it's subconscious most of the time, we try to make the other person be like us. But God didn't make that to bring that union together for you to just copy the other person. It's like it makes you a more well-rounded person. It helps you to create balance in your life when you learn how to, as an emotional creature that gravitates towards emotion, is what I say. That doesn't mean you're not logical. It means you just gravitate towards emotion. But having a man in your life who understands that and respects you, he teaches you how to be more logical, and you do the same thing to him. And so, and when you understand both of those dynamics in relationships, it helps you to be more balanced, not one side more than the other. Yeah.
Or the way I discuss that. So you and I are going to start a business. Now we're not married any longer. We're now just colleagues. Okay. You and I are going to start a business. First point I always make is I am the accountant, and you want to buy a $5,000 computer and we can't afford it. Think about this from a business perspective. Okay. So how do we solve that problem? You're going to look at my side and I'm going to look at your side, right? It's easy. Right? You're going to have to understand why our budget is tight. I'm going to have to understand what functionality you want in a $5,000 computer that you can't get in a $3,000 computer. But when I look at it from your side, you look at it from my side. Okay, well, we can afford a $3,000. Okay, is that okay?
Yeah.
3,000. Okay. Can you get what you need to get done in 3,000? And I can afford that. So now we've come together and we've solved the problem by looking at each other's perspective. But the other point about the partnership. So if you and I start a business, Sage, and we are both the best salespeople on the planet, will our business succeed?
No.
We don't have a product. What are we selling? Who's running the accountant? Who's going to make the product?
Yeah.
Why do you want me to think exactly like you? If both of us are salespeople, this is exactly what you just said. If both of us are salespeople, our business will not succeed. One of us has to sell, and the other has to do something else that they're good at. That's called a partnership. A partnership is where you have your skill sets and I have my skill sets, and we complement each other. That's a partnership. It's not both of us thinking the exact same way.
Exactly.
That is called a dictatorship, by the way.
Yeah. Right.
Go to North Korea. 100% of that population thinks like one person in North Korea. 100%. If you do not think like Kim Jong-un, you get killed.
Yeah. And then what progress is there? Progress is very slow. Yeah, exactly. So something that's coming to my mind, and I know somebody watching might be thinking this, maybe man or female. So we're going to this, equal partnership, and the woman brings the more emotional nature to the relationship. The man brings the more logical. We learn from each other, which helps us to grow. But in the context of all of that, what does the Bible mean when it says that man is the head? How do you see that?
One of the biggest, in fact, I've had a lot of discussions. It's funny, just to give you a background on this, Age, and I was on Clubhouse for a while. I don't really do it that much anymore, but I was on Clubhouse, and the reason why I was doing that is I was trying to meet other marriage experts. Okay. I have met 0 people from the psychology world. 0. Not a single psychologist has ventured off into some other world. Every person that I've met who's working in marriage successfully come from a religious background.
Okay.
Because of what we're talking about. There are concepts in the Bible, but the biggest ambiguity is the question you just asked. So, in fact, one of the biggest dialogues we've gotten is the notion of submission. Okay, submit. Okay, and unfortunately, because of the one-sided nature of the patriarchy message of the church, that's got a negative connotation to it. But what it means in a partnership is I submit to your skill sets and you submit to my skill sets.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is submission. So this notion that you're asking me is I'm in charge. I'm in charge of what I'm good at and you're in charge of what you're good at. What's so hard to understand about that, right? If you're good at something, why am I going to become an expert? I can learn from you. This is teaching each other, again, exactly what you just said.
Yeah. So when the Bible talks about the man being the head, and I'm curious as to your take on it. So do you feel like that, like, what do you think that means then?
It means that what I'm good at, I'm in charge of.
Okay. So what
you're good at,
okay,
you're in charge of.
Okay.
That's what's missing in your questions. What about submitting to the woman? Why isn't the woman also said to be in charge? She is too. That's
Yeah,
equality.
yeah, yeah.
Equality is not I have all the answers. Where we're going with this is what's so important to understand for people watching this. Listen to this one. The difference between somebody who is intelligent and somebody who is ignorant is one of them knows they're ignorant. Exactly. Listen to this one too. Illiteracy in the 21st century is not going to be people who cannot read or write. Illiteracy in the 21st century is going to be people who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn, which is exactly what you and I teach.
Yeah, yeah.
If you can't learn something and realize maybe there's a better way of doing it, you are stuck in a time zone that is never going to catch up with you.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So now we talked about I was thinking to say this really quickly is that so when you talk about a man and a woman bringing both of their skill set to the relationship and it helping us to be more balanced people, I think a lot of times, and this is when you get so focused on your spouse and you don't really understand God's role in relationship. The aim is to become like God, because God is very, very balanced. He's balancing what he does. He's balancing his logic. He balances his reason. So he created this relationship to bring us together so we can learn how to be like him. So if you're just looking at what your spouse is doing all the time and what they're not doing, it's kind of like what you said about comparing yourself to other people. You comparing yourself to yourself, but you compare the standard of where you should be or where you're getting to God, who God is. And so your spouse and stuff, your spouse and the problems, that's not the objective. The objective is, okay, how do we move closer to the image of God that he created us to be? And marriage helps us do that. Of course, there are other ways to do that, but marriage definitely helps us grow in ways that I believe we would not really be able to grow very well outside of it, because you need to see yourself, and you see yourself in marriage. Like you really... issues that you did not know you had.
You're supposed to see yourself.
You're supposed to.
Most people don't. Most people can't look in a mirror.
Exactly, and that's why we have the high divorce rate.
Right.
But marriage is designed, in my opinion, to help you see yourself.
Exactly, that's what it is. That is its goal. That is its function, to help you see yourself, that your spouse is sparking those triggers within you so that you can learn more about you. Quit blaming your partner.
Exactly. Oh, I love it. Yes. Okay, so we have about 15 more minutes here. So anybody's watching, if you have any questions you would like Mr. Tim to answer, please put them in the chat so we can get to those questions before we wrap up here in the next 15 minutes. If you're watching this later, after we've already recorded, you can still put your questions in the chat, and I will make sure Tim sees the question and can kind of give you an answer in the comments. And so now you talked about, you said communication and conflict resolution, and we talked a little bit about some of your pointers. Do you have any other pointers, seeing things from other people's perspective, understanding the balance between what we bring in relationships and things like that? What other keys can you offer us to divorce-proof our marriages?
Well, we haven't started the conflict resolution conversation yet, so I will try and keep that in as limited time as possible, because I know we're running towards the end of the show. But the way I discuss conflict resolutions, there's one of two ways of addressing conflicts, because conflicts are part of every relationship, and we all know that.
Yeah.
The first is a disagreement, and I've already described that. And Sage and I, as business partners with her computer requisition, that is a disagreement. We had a conflict, and the way it was handled was logically, forward-looking, and problem-solving. Those are the three characteristics of a disagreement. It's logical, it's forward-looking, and it's problem-solving. An argument, on the other hand, which is the way most people handle conflicts, is emotional, it's fault-finding, and it's backward-looking.
Yeah.
Okay? So what I do to help people to deal with arguments is I explain this is when the psychological understanding of the relationship becomes clear with what I'm about to describe to you. If you understand this concept, this gives you clarity in what are the psychological dynamics that are taking place within your marriage. Okay, it starts off with an insecurity, which then leads to a prejudice, which then leads to being judgmental, which then leads to being anger. So which is, and I love this example because most people can relate to it with our culture of divorce, but say your parents got divorced, insecurity. Okay. Yeah. That insecurity now, when you grow up and become an adult, leads to a prejudice. A prejudice, as we know, is a preconceived opinion that's not logically thought out, that's emotionally based. And then when you add that it was learned in childhood, you add the psychological damage and trauma that lesson, that negative lesson that was not comprehended as a child, is then brought into adulthood. So your parents got divorced, you now have a prejudice. One of the things that I've discovered, okay, and you can actually Google this, our mental problems, put them in quotes, our mental problems are prejudices, and you will get a total of 0 hits. I didn't know you could do that on Google. There's not a single person on the planet that has ever published anything that says that our mental problems are prejudices. This is a first you're hearing from now. This is one of my big discoveries. And that is that our mental problems are prejudices. The same as our social, our gender, our sexual, all of those prejudices that we've gone through provides the foundation for understanding relationship prejudice.
Exactly, yeah.
So when your parents got divorced, you now have a relationship prejudice, and a prejudice is a belief system that's not been thought out. Yeah. So now I'm afraid of you and me getting married, Sage, and I'm afraid of us getting divorced because my parents got divorced. So now I'm prejudiced against our marriage. And the reality is whatever you are afraid of happening in your marriage will happen.
Exactly.
As you well know. So that prejudice leads to me being judgmental. So now whenever I'm looking for problems now, I'm judgmental. Exactly. So you come home late from work one day and we're going to get divorced. I knew it. You can't do what you're told. This is where control comes in. This is where control comes in the form of being judgmental, and it shows itself as anger. And so what I'm doing, and this is my big grand conclusion in this section, and that's why I'm doing it quickly, is I'm connecting the dots between fear and anger. Now, let me explain that to you. One of the biggest things that I have discovered as well that you will find nowhere else in any psychology textbook is what mentally causes behavior. Nobody has figured that out. You want to confuse a professional, ask them what causes behavior, and you'll tell by their lack of answer that they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, professional psychologists do not know what causes behavior, and what causes behavior is our character trait.
All right, wow.
Okay. So, if you're a nice person, you wave to people. The waving is the behavior. The nice person is the belief system that is unconscious. That's your character traits. It's so important to understand that your character traits are unconscious. I do not consciously think of myself as being nice, but I behave accordingly. So we're obviously talking about the negative character traits, the negative belief systems. And those negative belief systems, the belief, the character trait, which leads to the behavior, the fear, the character trait, leads to anger, the behavior. Couples fall in love with their partner's character. They fall out of love with their partner's behavior. And I blame the psychology industry for this because of their monofocus, the monotony of interpretation that everything is behavioral based. So now we as a society look at our partner's behaviors and we lose sight of who our partners really are, which is their character. So what I'm going through with this argument conversation is, do you want to focus on the anger, the behavior, or do you want to focus on the fear, the character trait? And once you learn that the fear is the source of the problem, which is what you and I are talking about, by the way.
Yeah.
Now we address the fear, and now we go to the root causes. I'm going to put a neon light on my back wall, and that neon light's going to say root causes. So every time I do an interview, you're going to see this neon flashing light of root causes. Because again, that's what we're supposed to be discussing. And if that's what you're supposed to be getting in, whatever help, therapy, coaching, whatever help you're getting. If you're not discussing root causes, you're wasting your time and money.
Yeah, you are. Wow. So I have so many things running through my mind about what you said. Because a lot of the times we do, like I kind of mentioned earlier, when you have these problems that come up, because not only are you bringing your prejudice and your issues to the surface, your partner's bringing theirs too. So this is happening simultaneously. And then instead of you guys working through what you're bringing to the table, you just go at each other. You just go at each other. So now if the other person would just stop, then you'll be fine, and vice versa, when nobody is dealing with what is actually underneath the surface. And when you don't do that, you're absolutely correct. Divorce is inevitable, if not just a miserable marriage, like, because you're not growing, you're not learning, you're not dealing, finding out what's going on with you. And so I'm really big advocate on, like, you know, a lot of times, and I don't want to say this is just women, but I'm just speaking more to women because I am a woman and I know women do this. They just feel like if their partner can just change, everything will be fine. And I'm really big on saying no. Why are you responding that way to the problem? You have to deal with that first. Go ahead.
Here's what you say. My job is not to fix you. My job is to hold your hand while you fix yourself.
Yeah.
A person's biggest asset is their shoulder.
Yeah.
For their partner to cry on, because I can tell you, when I forgave my parents, it was not a logical realization. It was an emotional release. I cried. I fell in love with my parents that day, and I called them up and apologized for all the mean thoughts that I had with them. Change takes but an instant. It's the resistance to change that could take a lifetime.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. I love that. So you have to examine why you are responding to certain problems in a certain way. That doesn't mean that your partner is innocent. And I think a lot of times people think that, oh, if I make it about me, that means they get a pass. No, that means deal with you first, because you're contributing to the problem. Even if you think you're not, if you have a problem, you are contributing to it in some way. So figure out why you're responding the way you're responding. Like you said, childhood issues, prejudices, things like that. When you deal with those things, it helps you deal with the problem better, because the problem is there. So, but it clears up your mind to deal with it in a more productive way.
Okay, let me take my nerddom to a much bigger level.
Yeah.
Okay, listen to this one. I am going to describe to you an argument poetically.
I'm waiting to hear this one. How do you do that? I'm wondering, but go ahead. Yeah.
Exactly. And then I will give credit. This is Carl Jung. This is another thing that you learn when you get into Carl Jung stuff. Okay. And again, we're talking about fear. Where there is fear, there is the risk that the thread by which one hangs may be torn. Should that happen, one man tumbles into absolute affirmation, another into an equally absolute negation, where the pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. This fear lures men to extremes so that a simple truth is regarded as the truth, and a minor mistake is equated with a fatal error.
Oh, wow. And are you quoting something?
That is from Carl Jung. That is direct quote from Carl Jung, describing the dynamics that take place when two people are arguing. One man tumbles into absolute affirmation, other in equal absolute negation, where the pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. Why are we trying to find out who's right and who's wrong when one of us is being reasonable, the more the other one is being unreasonable?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what it does is it lures men to extremes so that a simple truth is regarded as the truth, and a minor mistake is equated with a fatal error. When you understand that that simple truth is not the truth, and that little mistake does not mean we're getting divorced, then you have matured. But if you think that Sage, you would, and I'm sure you deal with this too, it would be, I could write an entire book on the stupidity of the reasons why people have gotten divorced.
Yeah.
It's no longer just cheating. It's no longer you cheated on me. It's you didn't take the trash out. We're getting divorced. Okay, let me tell you this one. This is a great example of what I'm talking about. Okay, this is a couple, and these two know I love them, and these two know they're doing better, and every once in a while they get kind of off track. But these guys, I got done with the workshop a few months later. Within 5 minutes of each other, because one of the things I offer is if you guys, one falls off track, the other contacts me, and we have a coming to Jesus conversation with the three of us, because I'm going to bang some heads together. Because I don't allow divorce. This is a hardcore, you stay together, and here's how you do it successfully, because nobody's teaching you this. 5 minutes with each other, the husband said, we need to talk to wife. It was a long conversation, because she knows about forgiving her father, obviously, okay, and she says, I have forgiven my father. My father was controlling. My husband is controlling. I want to leave. So the three of us get together, and here's what happened. He works nights, sleeps in the morning, wakes up early one day to help her get the kids ready for school. And she wanted to divorce him for that.
Oh, wow.
She was in charge of the kids. He was trying to, one of the things people don't understand about how projection works, if I want to control you, I get mad when you don't do what I try and tell you to do, and I respond by saying, you're trying to control me. She was the one trying to control him because she hadn't forgiven her father yet, and she was thinking he was trying to control her because he woke up early to help the kids get ready for school. These two were going to get divorced because of that.
I mean, it goes to what you said about, I can't quote exactly, but problems that are like small are made to be so humongous, like deal breakers, when really all of that stuff is in your mind. Like you're projecting what's in your mind onto your reality when that's not always in alignment. So, wow.
So that's the point. But again, the reality is, and this is what you and I are doing, Sage, the goal is to make conscious what is unconscious.
Exactly.
Or else it appears as fate. This is what you are afraid of happening will happen unless you become aware of it and deal with it. So if you're consciously aware that your parents got divorced, or if I'm consciously aware that my parents got divorced and I'm being upset with Sage, my wife, because of my parents' divorce, now I know what is the cause. And now I'm on the road to figuring out where I'm supposed to be directing my healing instead of blaming Sage, which is so easy. It's your fault, Sage. Okay? Because you didn't do what I told you to do. And because of you, we're getting divorced because my parents got divorced. That's called a projection. Okay? The goal is to make clear and bring clarity on what is your psychological influences from your past on what's taking place today. Because what's taking place today is not what's going on today.
Yeah, exactly. And I've talked about it seems like a lot more recently about how we have, as beings made in the image of God, one of the things that we do is what is in our imagination becomes our reality. We have the ability to take things from the spirit, which is unseen, and make them real and visible. And we will reflect those things on our reality. A lot of times we don't even realize that this is a power that God has given us to be able to do that. Just like when he said, let there be light, the sun was already in his mind. He already thought of how it would work, what it would do, what size it would be. So when he said, let there be light, that sun became reality. So we can do that as well. We just do it sometimes on a subconscious basis. We don't realize that we're reflecting those things in our imagination onto our reality.
And to make that point even more profound, God, I have discovered who God is. He's love. God is love. And if you want to be in his image, love is a noun, not a verb. It is who you are, not what you do. Okay, that is God. If you want to put God in your relationship, understand that God is love and that love is a noun. It is who you are. And if you want to be in his image, and here's my big grand conclusion on this stage, love is happiness. That's all it is. I love my car. It's brand new. I'm happy I bought it. I mean, that love is happiness. We just haven't figured out how to have a happy marriage. You love your job that you love, right? You love your house. You love your kids. You're happy with Love is happy. I mean, I love my son. I'm happy that I have my son, but it's not always pleasant.
Yeah.
That's what you learn as a parent is, happiness is something you have to continue to work at. Yeah. My biography won't be finished until my obituary, and only God knows my real name. Life is a journey of continuous education.
Exactly.
If you learn the concept of curiosity, you're not only going to have a great marriage, but you're going to live a better life if you realize you don't know everything.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to get people to understand.
Yeah, so I have 2 points I want to just point out really quickly, then I have a question to ask you before we wrap up. So one of the things that you said about God being love, and we go to the definition of love in the Bible, is that it doesn't demand its own way. And a lot of the times this is what you get in relationships when you just said, you're not doing what I want you to do, and people don't realize that that's not love when you are trying to force somebody, right. Or even, and forces doesn't have to be physical, like wrestling. You're trying to influence them to do things the way you want them to do, whether by manipulation or coercion or silent treatment, whatever. That is not love. Love lets you be who you are. And of course, we still have things to work on, but it doesn't try to force you. Like even God doesn't force salvation onto people. You have to choose it for yourself, and then he works with you to help you work that out. So it's the same in relationships. And I tell people all the time, whenever you're getting to the point where you're trying to make your spouse do something, you're wrong. You can't. Yeah.
But it's to understand that the motivation behind your control issue is fear.
Exactly.
And when you understand that, you realize that love and fear do not coexist in the same room. You have one or the other that you get to choose from. You want to choose love or you want to choose fear. You can't do both. You cannot have love and fear. They do not go together.
Exactly.
You have one or the other.
And that was actually the second point, is fear, because the Bible talks about fear a lot. God says, fear not. For fear all over the Bible, because just like you said, it is the opposite of love. And God wants to bring us out of that so that we can fully act and operate in love. But you can't do that when you have fear there, which is basically where you're saying you have to deal with the fear. You have to deal with it, get rid of it, and then it frees you to be able to operate from a more loving place.
It's called mental freedom. This is what Sage and I are teaching is mental freedom. You don't forgiveness. It has nothing to do with the other person. It has nothing to do. The other person is irrelevant in the whole conversation. Forgiveness is all to do with me.
Yeah.
And freeing my mind. They don't even probably know that you're mad at them still. That's the thing I find hilarious when people say, I'm so mad at that person. Do they know that? Are they sitting there harboring the same resentment towards you do towards them? Or are they past that and you're living in the prison that you have created yourself?
Yes, absolutely. We could do a whole nother show about
that. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the question that I wanted to ask before we wrapped up, which I'm sure other people were watching may be thinking, so what happened with you and the lady from the beginning that brought all of this out for you to want to research and figure out what was going on? So what happened with that relationship?
Well, the reality is, in fact, I actually, this is a very important part of, it's the last emotional email that she sent me. Mm. Okay. After this, it was just, can I come pick my stuff up?
Okay.
Okay. It talks about how when we first met, we were at a girlfriend of hers house. We had spent the night there, and she was this is in Dallas, so big bathroom, huge bathroom, and she's sitting in this vanity, and I came put my hand on her, and she writes in this note, she goes, it's that morning at Angie's house, when you put your hand on my shoulder, that's when I fell in love with you. And her very next sentence says, but we can't protect each other. And we both need protection. Now, one of the things that I realized that I have never done in my relationships, I am an engineer. I have been trained to solve problems. I've never gotten angry and I've never gotten judgmental. I've gotten hurt and I've talked furiously. People always say I'm being loud yelling when I'm being, like you hear me today, I'm being very direct and serious. And I'm not angry. I haven't yelled at the whole conversation. I'm not yelled at all. But people will take that, and it's happened to me before, but I don't get angry. Okay? So in fact, in our situation, everything was my fault. I wrote this big letter. Everything in our relationship with this girl was my fault, and I tried to get her to see that. And what she's saying in this letter is that I didn't think anything bad about her. I did not build up this image of her. But one of the things that happens when you're breaking up with somebody is you're building them out to be a bad person. Now, let me give you an extreme example. Okay. When Carl Jung and Freud are breaking up, now they were professional colleagues. They weren't emotional, but they were professional colleagues. When Freud and Jung were breaking up, Freud fainted not once, but twice in Jung's presence. Fainted because he thought that Jung had a death wish towards him. This is how far Freud took, and he claims that Jung wanted to be a prophet. Where Jung, you read Jung, it was something he remembered his first dream when he's 3 or 4 years old. This was geniuses learn their trade at early age. Jung started very young in his journey to figure out what he's going to learn. He had no ulterior motives, no ego motives. Freud was the one with the ego motive. So Freud was the one who accused Jung of wanting to be a prophet because Freud was the one who wanted to be a prophet. And he was so afraid of Jung interfering with this vision he had of being famous that he fainted twice. This is what she's doing. You're building that wall between you and your partner. Vulnerability breaks that wall down. But when you're breaking up, this is what goes on. Hitler did not kill 6 million Jews in day one. It was a process. He started taking away pieces of their lifestyle. I have a very poignant story in my book about this. This is why I'm bringing this up. This is how relationships work. They start taking little things, little pieces, and they get bigger, until eventually Hitler killed 6 million people. Blame the Jews when the Germans were losing the war, in essence, what he did. But that's what was going on here. He had built such a negative image towards me that there was, and once I realized that, once I realized the therapist wasn't working, I sent her this letter, and he wrote one word in a 7-page letter that took me 40 hours to write. I emailed it to her thing, and she just read the letter, took all the emotion out of it. I have one word in there, condescending, and that was all she saw. I gave it to a good guy friend of hers, crying my eyes out to have this guy sit down with her. I cried in front of another man. I was hysterical. Trying to get the other man to open her eyes up. She didn't. I had 2 girlfriends of hers. Same thing, crying out. 2 meetings, they sit down with her. It's still all my fault. And once I went through that process, me doing this is why I'm here. The pain of that breakup, and we've all been through them. I hyperventilate. I lose my way. I go crazy. I lose my senses as I go. It's I have seen hell from below when basically admitted sleeping with another guy. Wow. Okay. I've seen hell from below when that conversation took place. And it is unbelievable that we have not put together the effort needed to keep that from happening in relationships. And it's unfriggin' believable how little effort there's out there. My pain of this relationship ending, I would love to say there's a happy ending to this story, but unfortunately there's not. Other than the fact that I wouldn't be here if that relationship had worked out.
And I mean that's a credit to how God kind of turns around our bad for good, because the relationship didn't work, but look at what you're doing now. Well,
that's the whole point. Then you get in the concept of fate. Now, because you and I are doing God's work, and you and I know that. That's fate. I have no say in this. I have this is out of my hands, out of my control. I have given up a Wall Street career. I hope you realize that. I have given up a Wall Street career to do this.
Wow.
Because
amazing.
This is so much more important than what I did working on Wall Street.
Wow. I love this. I want to learn more about you. I'm definitely going to research Carl Jung now, because I love anything that has to do with the mind, and I know his name.
Write this down, Sage. Memories, Dreams, Reflections. It's his autobiography. It summarizes his work, and I read it 9 times before I was able to summarize it for my book. It's called Memories, Dreams, Reflections. It was published in 1961. 20% of my book is a summary of that book.
Okay. Yeah, I am going to definitely buy that today. So, but wow, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate this conversation. Again, we can definitely do more about this and take out different components and do a whole show. I'm looking forward to
and
working with
I'm
you.
completely open to that. By the way, Sage, you've got we can continue doing this. Hopefully, your audience resonates. That's probably one of the things you want to see is if anybody resonates with this. And if you want to, I'd be more than happy to continue the conversation. Even an interactive one. You want to get people to ask questions online? I will.
Yes.
I can decipher and translate and solve virtually every problem in a marriage.
Yeah, yeah. I love
so
it.
you just discuss them, and I can tell you what the problem is and what to do about it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. We definitely are in the same. I feel the connection here. But can you let people know your website, your book, where they can find out more about you? Let them know about your Facebook group and everything, so people can reach out to you.
Well, the easiest thing to do is I am the founder of one of the largest marriage groups on Facebook. And the name of the group is the Marriage Support Group. The Marriage Support Group. You'll see a picture of a couple kissing. Of this recording, we're at 24,000 members. One of the things I do in this group is I allow other marriage experts to contribute. I have a private DM of 80 other marriage experts who all address marriages mentally and psychologically. I actually filter out. One of the funnest things I do, I get to kick out all the professional licensed therapists because they do more problems, cause more problems. So there are no licensed professional therapists unless they're still in hiding in my group. So the only advice you get from these marriage experts is advice from a mental and a psychological and spiritual perspective as well. Yeah. And in fact, I get about 1,000 posts a month and 30,000 comments a month in this group. So if you post a problem in your marriage, you can get hundreds of comments in this group. But you can also connect with me there. It's called the Marriage Support Group. My email address is timkellis@att.net. It's really easy. My name, Tim Kellis at att.net. You email me there, and I have a free 2-hour seminar. I will sit down with you and your spouse, 2 hours. By the time we're done, you guys will have a very solid foundation of how to create a successful marriage. No cost to that. Reach out to me and we can coordinate a time to get together. But the easiest thing to do, because I'm building that marriage group as a foundation for my mission to lower the divorce rate, because I'm building that group as a community of experts and members who all come together. And eventually in time, people are going to start talking about how their marriages have completely changed because they're taking this guidance that they're learning in this supportive group and actually implement it in their marriage. Because you actually get better advice from the common man and woman than you do from professional therapists. So you get better advice from this group than you do paying a professional therapist, even just going and posting a comment in what you'll hear from the members of this group, because they're giving you mental concepts instead of going on a date night, which is what you'll get from a therapist.
That's right. Wow, I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for this interview today. I'm so glad I reached out to you. We had this conversation. I definitely see us working together in the future. You, everybody watching, you have his information. Find him on Facebook, his email address. And thank you so much for tuning in. And, come back in 2 weeks again with my next show. So thank you so much, you guys. Be blessed and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you very much, Sage. I appreciate it.
No problem. I'm grateful as well. Bye.